They exposed the one secret everyone in the room would kill to keep buried. By the time anyone understood what had happened, Damien Cross was already on his feet. The private dining room of Marlowe House had been wrapped in its usual polished illusion just seconds earlier. Crystal glasses, low amber lighting, expensive laughter, waiters moving like shadows along the walls. Men in tailored suits had been speaking in quiet, controlled tones over 30-year whiskey. Women with diamonds at their throats leaned back in velvet chairs, pretending not to notice who had really paid for the evening. Nobody came to Marlowe House just for dinner. They came because Power liked to eat there. And when Damien Cross entered a room, Power stood up straighter. He had said almost nothing since arriving. He never needed to. His presence did the work for him. The conversations lowered on their own. The staff became sharper, faster, more careful. Even the manager, Tina Holloway, who had spent most of the evening scolding servers with the confidence of a woman who enjoyed borrowed authority, had softened her tone the second she saw him step through the glass doors. At the center of that room stood Alyssa Reed, a black waitress who had already worked 10 hours and should have gone home 40 minutes ago. Her feet ached. Her smile was gone. And the only thing she wanted was to drop her apron on the break room chair, ignore the subway noise, and sleep until the world stopped asking things from her. But Tina had stopped her near the service station with that tight, fake smile managers used when they were about to ruin your night. VIP room, Tina had said. Table 6 needs another set of hands. Alyssa had looked at the clock. My shift ended. And yet, Tina replied, glancing toward the private room, you're still here. So Alyssa stayed. That was how nights like this always worked. The wealthy made requests. The powerful made silence feel like a command. And women like Alyssa learned how to keep moving without letting anyone see what it cost. She carried a tray of drinks through the room, while a man near the far end barely looked at her before handing back a glass with a frown. Another snapped 2 fingers instead of using words. Someone else complained that the ice was melting too quickly, as if time itself should obey the mood of rich people. Alyssa answered politely, because politeness paid rent, even when dignity didn't. Then her phone vibrated in the pocket of her apron. Once, twice, then again. She ignored it at first. Staff weren't supposed to carry phones on the floor anyway, and Tina would have loved catching her with it. But the vibration kept coming, short, insistent bursts, one after another, like whoever was calling had decided silence was not an option. Alyssa moved toward the service station between tables and slipped the phone halfway out. No caller ID, just a missed call. And beneath it, a new voicemail. Her chest tightened for reasons she couldn't explain. Almost nobody called her that late, unless something was wrong. She stared at the screen for half a second longer than she meant to, then started to slide it back into her apron. That was when one of the guests pushed back from the table too suddenly behind her. His chair clipped her elbow. The phone slipped from her hand. It hit the hardwood floor, bounced once, and the screen lit up bright against the dark room. A woman's voice, thin with panic and age, cracked through the silence. Alyssa, if you hear this, don't let them leave. The room didn't just quiet. It froze. Alyssa bent down too late, her hand shaking as she reached for the phone. But before she could stop it, the voice came again, louder now in the stillness. If Damien hears this. Damien Cross rose from his chair. His expression changed so fast it felt less like emotion and more like recognition. Cold. Exact. Final. Every head in the room turned toward him. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at Tina. He looked only at Alyssa, and at the phone in her hand as though it had just opened a grave he thought had been sealed for years. Then his voice cut through the room, low and lethal. Lock every door. Now. Nothing reveals who truly owns a room faster than the moment everyone else realizes they're trapped inside it. For one suspended second after Damien Cross gave the order, nobody moved. The guests stared at him as if they had misheard. One woman let out a nervous laugh that died almost as soon as it left her mouth. A man near the window half rose from his chair, his face caught somewhere between outrage and caution, as though he still believed wealth might protect him from whatever this was. The waitstaff froze in place with trays in hand. Even the musicians in the corner had stopped playing, their silence hanging awkwardly beneath the low chandelier light. Then Rico Duran moved. He had been standing near the back wall all evening, quiet enough to be overlooked by anyone foolish enough to think the most dangerous man in the room was always the one seated at the head of the table. Rico touched the wire at his collar and spoke in a clipped tone Alyssa couldn't fully hear. Within seconds, two men in dark suits appeared at the front entrance. Another stepped into the hallway leading toward the kitchen. A fourth turned the deadbolt on the private exit usually reserved for VIP guests who preferred not to be seen arriving or leaving. That was when the room finally understood Damien had not made a dramatic suggestion. He had given a command. And commands like his became reality before fear had time to argue. Alyssa still stood near the center of the room with the phone clutched in her palm, her pulse hammering so hard it hurt. She barely registered the tray of untouched drinks beside her or the sharp smell of whiskey in the air. All she could hear was that voice from the voicemail, thin and urgent, trapped now inside her head. If Damien hears this, not if Alyssa hears this. If Damien hears this. As if the message had been sent through her just to reach him. Tina Holloway was the first person reckless enough to speak. "Mr. Cross," she said, trying to force a smile that looked sick under the lights. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Our guests are going to be very uncomfortable with." Damien turned his head. That was all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He simply looked at her, and Tina's words collapsed in her throat. Alyssa had seen difficult customers silence before. She had seen powerful people intimidate with money, with influence, with the lazy confidence that came from never hearing no. But this was different. This was not social pressure. It was the kind of authority that made resistance feel dangerous on a physical level. One of the men at the table pushed back his chair. "I have a driver waiting," he said, attempting firmness. "I'm leaving." Rico stepped smoothly into his path before he could take more than 2 strides. "No," he said. The man's jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" Rico didn't blink. Not the one giving orders. A few people looked away after that. Alyssa should have looked away too. She should have kept her head down, apologized, maybe claimed the message had to be some kind of mistake. That would have been the safe thing, the normal thing. But Damien was still watching her with a focus so intense it felt like he had forgotten every other person in the room existed. He crossed the space between them with measured steps, not hurried, not theatrical, controlled. That was somehow worse. A man who ran toward danger could still be surprised by it. A man who walked like this already knew exactly what kind of danger he was facing. When he stopped in front of her, Alyssa became painfully aware of everything. Her tired feet, her wrinkled uniform, the cheap phone case cracked at one corner, the fact that all these rich strangers were now staring at her like she mattered for reasons she did not understand. "Play it again," Damien said. Alyssa swallowed. I don't even know who sent it." His expression did not change. "Play it." Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, she considered refusing, if only because refusing was the last small piece of control she had left. But the room around her had already shifted into something colder, tighter, more dangerous. Whatever was happening had begun the moment that voice said his name. Pretending otherwise would not save her now. So Alyssa pressed the message. The woman's voice crackled through the speaker again, rough with fear and exhaustion. "Alyssa, if you hear this, don't let them leave. If Damien hears this, tell him they lied about the fire. Tell him the girl is alive." The message cut off in a burst of static. No one breathed. For the first time since standing up, Damien Cross looked shaken. Not openly. Not enough for anyone else in the room to name it. But Alyssa saw it. The smallest break in that hard, controlled face. A flicker. A fracture. As if one sentence had reached through 15 buried years and put a hand around his throat. Then his gaze sharpened again, turning lethal. "Take her," he said to Rico. And every eye in the room followed Alyssa as the night stopped belonging to anyone else. Some truths don't enter a room like a confession. They arrive like a weapon, and suddenly everyone is deciding who gets to survive knowing them. Alyssa's first instinct was to step back. It happened before thought, before strategy, before pride. The moment Damien said, "Take her," her body reacted the way bodies do when they understand danger faster than the mind can name it. Her shoulders tightened. Her hand closed around her phone. Her heels slid half an inch against the polished floor as if there might still be time to turn and run. There wasn't. Rico Duran did not grab her. Somehow that made him more frightening. He approached with calm, measured restraint, one hand gesturing toward the side hallway that led away from the private dining room. "This way," he said, as if she had a choice. The guests watched with hungry unease, The kind of curiosity people showed when horror happened close enough to entertain, but not, they hoped, close enough to touch them. Tina stood near the service station with both hands clasped tightly at her waist, her face pale and rigid. She had spent all evening speaking to Alyssa like she was disposable. Now she looked at her as if she had become a lit fuse no one knew how to put out. Alyssa forced herself to move. The hallway beyond the dining room felt colder than the room she had left behind. The music was gone back there. So was the soft performance of luxury. Marlowe House had been built to flatter men with money, but behind the velvet and amber light was the harder skeleton of the place. Narrow corridors, locked office doors, storage alcoves, polished surfaces that reflected people in broken fragments as they passed. Rico walked half a step. Behind her, close enough to control the pace without touching her, two more men fell into position at the rear. By the time they reached the private office, Alyssa's pulse had become a hard, painful rhythm in her throat. Rico opened the door. Inside, she entered a room that looked less like an office and more like a command center disguised as wealth. Darkwood shelves. A wall of liquor no one drank casually. A desk too clean to belong to a man who did paperwork himself. No family photos. No softness. Just order, money, and the kind of silence built by men who expected to be obeyed. Damien was already there. She had not seen him leave the dining room, but somehow he was standing at the far end of the office near the windows, one hand in his pocket, the city lights behind him. The glow from outside cut his face into shadow and bone. He turned when she entered, and that same cold attention settled on her again with unnerving precision. Rico shut the door. The click of the lock was quiet. Alyssa heard it anyway. For a moment no one spoke. Damien looked at her phone, then at her face, then back at the phone, as though measuring which of the two was more likely to betray him first. "What is your mother's name?" he asked. "Not who are you? Not where did you get that message? What is your mother's name?" Alyssa frowned, thrown by the question. "Why?" His voice dropped a degree, somehow becoming more dangerous by growing quieter. "Answer me." She hated that she did. Monica Reed. Nothing in his posture changed, but something in the room did. Rico's eyes shifted slightly. One of the men near the door straightened. Damien's gaze sharpened with the stillness of a man finding the exact detail he had feared. "How old were you when she disappeared?" he asked. The word hit harder than she expected. Disappeared. Most people said left. Alyssa had heard it her whole life. Your mother left. Left town. Left you behind. Left without a note. The gentler lie everyone used because the alternative sounded too ugly, too heavy, too impossible to explain to a child. She crossed her arms before realizing she had done it. "I was 8. Damien said nothing. Alyssa's voice came back tighter. "If you know something, stop talking around me." His eyes lifted fully to hers then, and for the first time since this started, she saw more than control in them. Not kindness. Not guilt exactly. But recognition. Old and unwelcome. "That voicemail," he said, "was never supposed to reach you." A chill passed through her, so quickly it felt like memory. She looked down at the phone in her hand, suddenly aware of how absurdly ordinary it seemed. Cracked case. Smudged screen. A cheap object carrying something powerful enough to lock down an entire building. "Then who was it for?" she asked. Damien took one step closer. "For me," he said. And in the silence that followed, Alyssa understood something terrifying. This was not a misunderstanding. She had not stumbled into someone else's danger. She had been used to open the door to it. The most dangerous moment in any secret is not when it is exposed. It is when you realize you were chosen to carry it without ever being asked. Alyssa stared at Damien cross, waiting for the rest of the sentence to make this less insane. It didn't. The office felt smaller now, the air pressed tight by too many things not being said. Somewhere beyond the walls, the restaurant still existed. Glasses on linen, expensive voices lowered to whispers, locked doors holding panic in polished cages. But in here, all of that had become background noise. The real center of the night had moved into this room, and somehow it had moved around her. "For you," Alyssa repeated. "I don't even know you." Damien's expression remained unreadable. "That has never been a requirement." She almost laughed at that, but the sound died before it formed. Fear was changing shape inside her. It was no longer just fear of him, or of the men at the door, or of being trapped in a building with people who obeyed commands without blinking. It was becoming something else, something colder and more personal. The fear of discovering that parts of her life had been arranged by forces she had never seen. Rico stepped toward the desk, already shifting into action. "We need to trace the call." "It won't matter," Damien said. That answer caught everyone's attention, even the men who had been trained not to show surprise. Rico frowned. "If it came through a relay, we can still—" "They wanted it found," Damien cut in. "They wanted me to hear it. That means whatever trail they left either disappears in an hour or leads exactly where they want us to go." He looked back at Alyssa. "What matters is how they found her." The words landed heavily. Not how they found the number. Not how they sent the message. How they found her. As if she were not a woman standing in front of him, but a lost piece of something older and far more dangerous. Alyssa straightened. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here." Damien held her gaze for a beat too long. "Then listen carefully." He moved away from the window and toward the desk, his tone turning precise, deliberate, the voice of a man used to briefing others in rooms where mistakes cost blood. 15 years ago, there was a fire in a warehouse on the South Docks. Officially, 7 people died. Unofficially, that fire buried a war before it could start. Alyssa's stomach tightened. She didn't know why the story unsettled her so quickly. Maybe it was the way he said official and unofficial, as if one version of the truth belonged to the city and the other belonged to men who made their own laws after dark. "My mother had nothing to do with any war," she said. One of Damien's shoulders shifted faintly, the closest he seemed capable of coming to impatience. "Your mother had everything to do with who walked away from it." The room went still again. Alyssa felt the blood drain from her face. "No, you asked if I knew something," he said. "I knew Monica Reed." The name in his mouth sounded wrong. Too familiar. Too weighted. Alyssa's fingers curled tighter around her phone. "How?" Damien did not answer immediately, and the silence around the question became its own warning. Rico looked at him once, as if checking whether this was information he truly intended to release. Damien made the decision without looking back. "She worked under a different name," he said. "Not for me. Near me. Close enough to see things she was never supposed to see." Alyssa shook her head before he finished. "That's not possible." "It is," he said. "And tonight proves someone else knows it." Her mind resisted everything at once. Her mother had worked double shifts at a laundromat, had smelled like soap and starch and peppermint gum, had sung off-key while braiding her hair. The woman Alyssa remembered was tired, kind, private, not connected to docks, fires, dead men, or whoever could make Damien Cross lock down an entire restaurant with one sentence. "You're lying," she said, though the words lacked force. "If I were lying," Damien replied, "I would tell you something easier." That hit harder because it sounded true. Rico's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then lifted his eyes. The security sweep found a breach. Damien's face hardened instantly. "Where?" "Service entrance." One camera looped. 2 minutes missing. Alyssa felt the room tilt. Someone had already been inside. Damien's gaze snapped to the men at the door. "Double the hall. Nobody enters this floor." Then he looked at Alyssa again, and whatever restraint had kept his voice measured began to disappear beneath urgency. "They're not testing me," he said. "They're coming for her." And for the first time that night, Alyssa believed him. From the same block number. "Tell Damien Ethan Cole is alive." The message ended. Silence dropped so abruptly it felt violent. Alyssa looked from the phone to Damien, not because she understood the name, but because she knew instantly that he did. The change in him was unmistakable. Not fear exactly. Something darker. Older. The kind of reaction that came from a dead thing forced back into motion. Rico swore under his breath. One of the men by the door shifted his stance. "That's impossible." Damien didn't take his eyes off the phone. "No," he said quietly. "It's expensive." The line made no sense to Alyssa, but it clearly meant something to the others. The room tightened around it. Rico stepped closer. If Cole's alive, then this wasn't about leverage. It was bait from the start. "It was always bait," Damien said. Alyssa's throat felt dry. "Who is Ethan Cole?" No one answered immediately. She hated that pause more than any lie. It was the silence of men deciding how much truth she was entitled to. As if the danger aimed at her still did not earn full disclosure. "Someone who should have died in that fire," Damien said at last. The words sank into her slowly. "Should have. Not did." Alyssa wrapped her free arm around herself. "And he's coming here?" "He was already here," Rico said grimly. "Or someone working for him was." The office door opened a fraction before one of the guards slipped inside. His face was tight with urgency. "We found the staff member who opened the corridor." Damien turned. "Where?" "In the prep kitchen." "Bring them up." The guard hesitated. Rico noticed first. "What?" The guard swallowed. "He's dead." Alyssa's breath caught. The man continued, voice clipped, professional only because anything softer might have shaken. "Single wound. Clean. No noise reported. Whoever used him made sure he wouldn't talk after." A pulse of cold moved through the room. There it was, the confirmation no one had wanted, but everyone understood. This wasn't just surveillance. It wasn't a warning with theatrical edges meant to frighten Damien into reacting. Someone had infiltrated the building, turned a member of staff, erased the witness, and timed every move around Alyssa's phone. Damien's expression became still in a way that felt more dangerous than anger. "Lock the kitchen stairwell," he said. "Pull every staff file. Nobody leaves with a coat, bag, or phone. I want names, schedules, debts, relatives." The guard nodded and disappeared. Alyssa stared at Damien. "You said you could protect me." He looked at her then, directly, and for the first time there was no distance in his answer, only grim honesty. "I said I would," he replied. "I didn't say we were ahead." Then Rico's phone buzzed, and when he checked the screen, even he went pale. "What?" Damien asked. Rico lifted his eyes. "We just got a hit from facial recognition at the rear loading dock," he said. "It's him." Ethan Cole was in the building. The worst betrayals are never the ones done by strangers. They are the ones that prove someone has been standing near your life for years, waiting for the right moment to tell you who you really are. The words seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "He's in the building." Alyssa felt them physically, like a draft finding the back of her neck. She looked at Damien, waiting for the burst of commands, the explosion of force, the immediate violence that men like him always seem to carry just beneath the surface. But he did something that unsettled her more. He went still, not frozen, calculating. Rico knew the difference too. The loading dock camera caught half his face, he said, already pulling the image up on his phone. "Enough to confirm. Put up, cap low." He moved through the delivery corridor 3 minutes ago. "Alone?" Damien asked. "We don't know." Of course they didn't. Men like Ethan Cole did not walk into fortified buildings alone unless they were either desperate or certain the room had already been softened from the inside. Given the dead staff member downstairs, Alyssa knew which answer was more likely. Damien held out his hand. Rico passed him the phone. Alyssa watched his eyes move over the image. There was no visible shock this time, only a severe kind of recognition, as if the face on the screen had not returned from the dead so much as resumed an unfinished sentence. "You knew he was alive?" Alyssa said. It came out harsher than she intended. Both men looked at her. Rico's reaction was immediate irritation. Damien's was quieter, and that only sharpened her anger, because suddenly she understood something that had been needling at her since the first voicemail. He had not reacted like a man hearing impossible news. He had reacted like a man hearing feared news confirmed. "You knew," she said again. Damien handed the phone back to Rico. "I knew there was a chance." "A chance?" Alyssa stepped closer before caution could stop her. "You locked down an entire building because of a chance." "No," he said. "I locked it down because of Monica." That answer hit too cleanly. Alyssa stared at him. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Saying my mother's name like it explains anything." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Damien exhaled once, as if some internal line had finally been crossed. 15 years ago, he said, Ethan Cole worked with men who wanted control of the docks, the routes, the money moving. Through them, they set the fire to erase ledgers and witnesses. But there was one witness they didn't account for. Alyssa knew before he said it. Her chest tightened anyway. Monica. The room seemed to tilt around the name. Rico looked away slightly, not out of discomfort, but out of old familiarity with a story he had heard in fragments and never from this close. Damien continued, voice low and exact. She wasn't supposed to be there. She saw Cole before the fire spread. She saw who he met with, what he took, and who they were planning to blame after. Alyssa shook her head, tears of frustration threatening now because denial was becoming harder to hold. Then why disappear? Why leave me? She didn't leave you to escape, Damien said. She disappeared to keep you unfindable. The sentence cut through her like wire. Everything in her resisted it. Years of silence. Missed birthdays. Empty rent apartments. Social workers. The ache of being a child who learned not to ask why anymore, because adults either pitted her or lied badly. She had built an entire life around one wound. Her mother abandoned her. Now this man was trying to replace that wound with another one. If that were true, Alyssa said, her voice shaking, then why never come back? Damien's face hardened, but not at her. At memory. Because she came to me first. Alyssa went still. Rico didn't move. No one did. Damien looked directly at her, and whatever wall had held the final part back was gone now. The night of the fire, your mother brought me something she took from Cole. Not money. Not a ledger. Proof. Names, routes, accounts. Enough to destroy men who would have killed half the city to recover it. Alyssa could barely breathe. Where is it? She whispered. Damien's eyes dropped, for the first time, to the phone in her hand. That, he said, is what Ethan thinks you inherited. And before Alyssa could process the meaning, her mind flashed to something buried so deep she had not thought of it in years. A silver music box her mother made her keep, no matter how many homes they moved through before she vanished. Sometimes the one thing you spend your whole life dismissing as a useless memory turns out to be the reason armed men are willing to kill for your name. The silver music box came back to Alyssa all at once. Not as a clear image at first, but in fragments. The chipped enamel at one corner, the faded blue paint worn thin along the lid, the tiny ballerina inside that no longer spun unless you wound the key twice and tapped the hinge. She had not opened it in years. It had survived 3 apartments, 1 shelter, 2 storage cleanouts, and every season of her adult life, not because she treasured it, but because throwing it away had always felt strangely impossible. Her mother had insisted on that. If anything happens, keep this. A sentence Alyssa had once filed away with all the other mysterious things adults said to children when they didn't want to tell the truth. Now the truth was standing in front of her wearing a dark suit and carrying 15 years of unfinished violence in his voice. Where is it? Damien asked. Alyssa looked up sharply. At home. Rico moved immediately. I'll send a team. No. The word came from Damien so fast it cut across the room. If Cole thinks she has it, he's already watching every route she could take home, every file tied to her address, every place she slept twice. Alyssa's stomach tightened. He was probably right. That was the problem with Damien. Every answer that made her resent him also made the world feel more dangerous without him. So what now, she asked. Before he could respond, a burst of gunfire cracked somewhere below them. Not loud enough to be in the room. Close enough to turn everyone inside it into motion. Rico had his weapon out before the second shot echoed. The men at the door drew instantly, one opening the office door, the other flattening to the wall outside. Alyssa flinched at the sound, heart slamming against her ribs. The polished office was gone in an instant, stripped of wealth and exposed for what it truly was. A fortified nest in a building under attack. Rico touched his earpiece. Report. Static. Then a strained voice. Contact at kitchen stairwell. 2 down. We lost visual on one shooter moving toward the west hall. Not one shooter. One shooter moving. Meaning others were. Likely planted elsewhere. Damien's face became almost unnaturally calm. Cole doesn't want a siege, he said. He wants confusion. He wants her moved. Alyssa stared at him. Moved where? Anywhere we choose in a panic. Another shot sounded, followed by shouting from farther away. Rico crossed to the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, removing a second handgun and an access card. He handed the card to Damien. Service lift still clear. Basement route to the old cellar if we move now. Damien took the card but didn't move. His eyes were on Alyssa. No, he said. Rico blinked once. No. If Cole built this around her, then retreat is the move he planned for. Staying here isn't safer. I didn't say it was. The tension between them sharpened instantly, not loud but dangerous. These were not men arguing about fear. They were arguing about patterns, old habits, the logic of an enemy who had once burned people alive to protect his secrets. Alyssa's voice came out before she could stop it. You said my mother took proof. If Ethan wants it, then he thinks I can lead him to it. Damien looked at her. For the first time all night, she saw him listen instead of command. She forced herself to keep going. Then stop treating me like cargo and use me like bait. Rico swore softly. Absolutely not. But Damien didn't dismiss it. That was enough to terrify Alyssa and steady her in the same breath. He'll expect you to hide me, she said. If I move where you want me to move, he wins. If he thinks I'm scared enough to run, he follows the path he already designed. And if you're wrong? Rico asked. Alyssa swallowed. Then he kills me either way. The room went silent again. Damien stepped toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. Do you understand what you're saying? She nodded once, though her entire body felt cold. Yes. Another voice came through Rico's earpiece, urgent now. Movement outside the executive hall. Possible visual. Damien's decision arrived in the next second. To the dining room, he said. Rico stared at him. You're putting her back in the open? I'm putting Cole where I can see him. He turned to Alyssa and held out his hand, not for the phone, not to restrain her, but to move with him into the center of the storm. And against every instinct she had left, Alyssa took it. And in that shattered room, with one dead past finally speaking and another still armed in front of her, Alyssa understood the night was not ending. It was only deciding who she would become and what came next.